Well, hello again all my YouTube browsers and subscribers, and thanks once more for giving up your valuable time to view another vintage off-road machine here in my world of classic dirt bikes. Now in the past we have featured many classic dirt bikes here on my channel, usually in fine pristine condition, with a few of them even in as brand new museum quality condition. So in this featured clip we're going to look at a machine that is certainly no garage queen and definitely not show winning condition, but is still a genuine old vintage race bike that has been used on the track for many years and surely deserves to have its 10 minutes of fame here on my classic dirt bike YouTube channel. Now our featured machine is Robert Kennedy's 1975 580 CCM, which he has owned and raced for the last 23 years. And Robert still regularly takes this bike to the track to race at classic and vintage events up and down the length and breadth of the UK. Now Robert initially purchased this bike back in 1986 from a rider in Carluke near Edinburgh. Now apparently the rider put the machine up for sale because he always found it very difficult to start and wanted to move the bike on. So Robert quite happily handed over £210, where he then subsequently became the brand new owner of this very nice 1975 CCM. Now the engine of course is a 1975 580 3-speed CCM motor with a 1990 bore and stroke. Now you can see that this bike has been in the wars with all the dings and dents on the casings, and you can see that this old girl has certainly seen a lot of action on the racetrack in the past, and she is showing a lot of her battle damage scars in this particular shot. Although despite those, Robert says these old B50 derived BSA motors are still great engines if you just look after them. But of course it's thanks to the ingenuity of the late Alan Clues that these bikes even exist, because when Alan first purchased the remains of the then defunct BSA competition department in 1971, he never really had any access to the BSA works engines at the time, so he immediately just went ahead and made improvements and upgrades to these standard BSA B50 engines. Now of course the ignition system on Robert's bike is basically the same as many of these CCMs these days. Is powered by the Interspan ignition system, whereby the combined ignition and power pack is charged before a race meeting and then fitted back onto the bike for the duration of that race event. Now Robert's machine is also fitted with these Cremica front and rear brake hubs. Now in the front suspension department, these are Corticosa front forks, also mated to that standard Cremica front brake hub. Now in the rear shocks department, naturally of course these are not the original rear shocks fitted to Robert's bike, although that's not really surprising when you consider the age of the bike, and Robert's shocks have been changed for a set of these Fox air shocks. Now of course these CCM bikes have the engine oil sighted in the frame, which normally holds just a few litres of oil and is then pumped round the motor and then back into the frame. Now many riders opt to improve on this oil lubrication system by mounting an external oil filter cartridge at the front of the motor, rather than just relying on that simple little gauze filter that is located at the bottom of the frame, which of course you have to remove and wash on a regular basis. Now, as you can see, Robert's bike has still got its original 1975 fiberglass fuel tank. CCM of course opted to use these fiberglass fuel tanks on their 75 bike as opposed to using a steel or alloy tank, and this of course was just done purely to keep the weight to a minimum. Now, Robert's 1975 bike of course is still sporting its original set of handlebars, complete with these Magura levers and this Doherty throttle gasser, which is quite a rare item and very unusual to be still found on a machine from 1975. Now, in the past, of course, there have been many famous riders who have slung their legs over these iconic 1975 CCM bikes, including, of course, the likes of John Banks and the legendary Vic Eastwood. Now, Mike Etoff is another name who won the AMCA 750cc championship on a similar bike to this in 1975. Now, since buying this bike in 1986, Robert took the bike to its first ever race event at Knockhill Racing Circuit in 1987, and since that particular race meeting the bike has attended every single race meeting with the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club. Now, in the 23 years Robert has owned and raced this bike, he has only had two major issues with regards to the reliability of the engine. One particular case was when the motor broke a con rod, and the other was when the engine dropped a valve, which of course then led to a major top end overhaul. But other than that, Robert says this motor has been very reliable and is still a fantastic old race bike. Now, naturally, Robert's bike is still used on a regular basis at classic scramble events around the country, although Robert told me that he doesn't ride the bike very much these days due to not being in the best of health. But nevertheless, Robert's son, Robert Jr., makes good use of this bike now, as he also races a 560 CCM model, and Robert Jr. uses his dad's 1975 as a standby machine should any mechanical issues befall his 560 race bike. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is no Garage Queen or Concourse display bike. This is a good old-fashioned, down-to-roots classic scrambles machine that gets used on a regular basis. Although when Robert was fit enough to ride this bike, he said it was an absolute dream to ride, and you can see this picture here at a Thornhill scramble from some time back with young Andrew King there. Robert diving down the inside of Andrew King, number 293 on the HIS Stormer, but Robert said this bike has been a fantastic old warhorse for him, and he's well pleased that Robert Jr. is now making good use of his old race bike. Of course, Robert's bike is not 100% original, but then many of these older CCMs aren't anyway, purely because of the age of the bike, but the only difference between an original bike and this one of Robert's is the shocks. The rear shocks have been changed, and I think the bike has a different carburetor, but other than that, this is still a very nice example from 1975. Of course, the other small point is that Robert's 75 bike still has its original rear alloy wheel, although The front wheel was changed at one point. But nevertheless, that's neither here nor there. The fact is that this is still a good old-fashioned, genuine, old vintage race bike. And Robert has had many years of fun and successes while riding this bike, and he's very happy that Robert Jr. is now making use of this old racer. And so I hope you've enjoyed this very brief look at Robert Kennedy's 1975 CCM 580. This video was brought to you in association with WorldSport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more details.